Breaking news coming out of the Middle East right now, Iran is absolutely on fire. We are talking about massive, unprecedented unrest shaking the very foundations of the Islamic Republic. Millions, yes, millions of citizens have flooded the streets screaming for the regime to collapse. It started with the economic freefall triggering strikes in Tehran's historic Grand Bazaar, but that spark has now turned into a wildfire. It is not just staying in the capital anymore. This wave of defiance is moving fast, spilling out way beyond the city limits. We are seeing reports of uprisings popping up everywhere on the map. From the holy city of Mashhad up north, all the way down to the port of Bandar Abbas in the south. Even out west in the critical strategic zones of Ilam and Abdanan, the people are rising up. The latest intel coming across the wire suggests that 25 out of Iran's 31 provinces are currently witnessing active, fierce protests. That is nearly the entire country engulfed in chaos. And get this, the regime's crackdowns are failing. They have reportedly lost control of the streets in over 100 different towns and settlements. The iron fist is slipping. To put it bluntly, the structural integrity of the Iranian leadership is gone. The pillars that have held this theocracy up for decades aren't just cracking. They look like they're crumbling right before our eyes. But here's the twist that changes everything. The fracture isn't just happening with the protesters on the pavement. It is happening at the very top of the food chain, right under those clerical robes. The footage coming out is absolutely jaw-dropping. You might expect this rhetoric from a Western spy or maybe a college student leader, right wrong. The man speaking out against the power structure is one of their own, an actual Iranian mullah. That means we are looking at an insider, a man of the cloth turning on his masters. The words leaving his mouth serve as a giant white flag of surrender for the 47-year-old Islamic Revolution. He looks straight into the camera and says, quote, "I am a mullah. I stand against this cruel, murderous regime. May God place a curse upon Khamenei and Khomeini?" End quote. That is heavy stuff. He goes on to demand that the entire population rise up and wipe out what he calls a satanic regime. Now this clip is circulating wildly on social media, and while we haven't independently verified it yet, the impact is undeniable. Think about the implications here. When a cleric is openly cursing his own supreme leader, the clock isn't just ticking anymore, the alarm has gone off. It signals that the regime's political apocalypse has officially begun. There's a massive canyon opening up in Iranian society right now. And it is not just the usual divide between the angry citizens and the oppressive state apparatus. We are seeing a split between the state's religious authority and its military muscle. It is the mullahs versus the Revolutionary Guards, and that is a recipe for total internal collapse. Standing on the edge of that precipice, loyalty has gone out the window. Now it is every man for himself, and everyone in power is purely focused on saving their own skin. While the city centers burn and the tear gas flies, reports say there is a different kind of activity in Tehran's ritzy districts, a quiet, frantic rush to pack designer suitcases and get out of Dodge. A bombshell report from the French outlet Nouvelle Revue Politique, citing deep intelligence sources, really exposes the stunning hypocrisy of these leaders. It slaps you right in the face with the truth. According to the leak, dozens of top-tier officials within the Iranian government are secretly scrambling to apply for entry visas. They are trying to get their families into France and Germany before the hammer falls. So, who exactly made this list leaked by the media? You won't believe the names. We are talking about the inner circle here. Relatives of former President Hassan Rouhani, and even the family members of the Speaker of Parliament Mohammad Bakr Kalibaf. The irony is rich. The very people who spent decades brainwashing the public that the West is the great Satan are now literally begging for asylum in those exact same Western countries. So while the clerics in the suits are plotting their European vacations, the disconnect between the politicians and the security forces on the ground is getting wider by the second. The commanders of the paths around the IRGC are getting nervous. They are watching these politicians ship their families abroad, and they are starting to connect the dots. They are terrified that once the dust settles, the politicians will be sipping coffee in Paris, while the military guys get thrown under the bus as scapegoats for the crackdown. This paranoid atmosphere is absolutely crippling the state. They can't respond to the crisis with a unified front because nobody trusts the guy standing next to him anymore. And it is not just the big-shot politicians running for the exits. The police and security forces the regime's enforcers are bailing too. We have confirmed reports of police stations completely abandoned in places like Abdanan and Qasr-e-Shireen. You have security officers literally stripping off their uniforms in the streets to blend in with the protesters, or they are making a break for the border to save themselves. It is the classic sinking ship scenario. The lifeboats are being filled first by the captains and the taskmasters. But what about the man at the very top of the pyramid? We are talking about Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. It has become painfully clear that neither he nor the ghost of Shadow Commander Qasem Soleimani holds any power over the Iranian streets anymore. If you want proof that the regime's invincible aura is shattered, look at what is happening to the statues of Soleimani in Karaj and other major cities. Crowds are torching and destroying monuments to Soleimani. Remember, this guy was marketed as the regime's ultimate sacred hero, a figure beyond reproach. That destruction sends a loud and clear signal. The Iranian people don't think there is any room left in their country's future for these religious or military icons. Plus, the fact that nobody stopped them suggests the security forces have completely lost their motivation to defend these symbols of the state. In simple terms, that wall of fear that kept everyone in line, it has been torn down brick by brick. These figures used to be untouchable gods in the eyes of the public. Now they are unwanted. This is a harsh, stark reality check for the regime in Tehran. Given all that, it is no surprise that whispers are circulating about the regime's top brass planning to pack their bags and run. The Times just dropped a bombshell report based on fresh intel. They are claiming that Khamenei has a contingency plan to flee straight to Moscow if things spiral totally out of control. And that makes sense when you remember those 5 mysterious Russian cargo planes that touched down in Tehran just a few days ago. The official story was standard military cooperation. But behind the scenes, the rumor mill is spinning a very different narrative. People are saying those jets weren't there to drop off supplies. They were sent to extract the regime's most valuable assets, and maybe even the supreme leader himself. We have seen this playbook before. Could the exile strategy, once drafted for Maduro in Venezuela, now be getting rewritten for Khamenei on a one-way flight to Moscow? History has a funny way of repeating itself, and the irony here has a chilling sort of symmetry to it. While pundits argue over whether Khamenei is boarding a Russian jet today, we need to turn the calendar back exactly 47 years to the bitter winter of 1979. Back then, that same airport in Tehran witnessed a nearly identical escape scene. It was the Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who tearfully boarded his plane, told his people he was tired, and flew away into history, never to return. Let's take a trip back in time to February 1st, 1979. An Air France jumbo jet touches down on the tarmac in Tehran, delivering the man in the black robes, Ruhollah Khomeini, who would fundamentally alter the course of history. He stepped off that plane selling a dream of absolute liberty and spiritual awakening to millions of hopeful citizens. But that dream quickly morphed into a nightmare as the theocracy he built became a repressive machine, just as brutal as the monarchy it replaced. The irony here is thick enough to cut with a knife. The very same hardliners who spent decades screaming that the Shah was an American puppet are now tripping over themselves to ship their own children off to universities in the West. It looks like the historical cycle has finally thrown the gear into reverse. Back then, the Shah was boarding a plane to leave while Khomeini was flying in. Now, the tables are completely turning. Today, reports suggest the ruling mullahs are frantically checking their escape routes, while a ghost from the past haunts the capital. The name of Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, who was forced into exile at 17 back in 79, is suddenly echoing through the streets of Tehran. The Crown Prince has officially ended his long, quiet spell. After decades of watching from the sidelines, Pahlavi's son is stepping up, breaking his silence and making his voice heard. In a series of bold new statements, Reza Pahlavi isn't just offering commentary, he is declaring himself fully prepared to take the helm and steer Iran toward national salvation. He is making a direct appeal to the military brass to defect and stand with the citizens. This isn't just nostalgia for the old days. He is re-entering the arena as a serious, viable political alternative. When you hear crowds chanting Javed Shah in the streets, don't mistake it for a simple wish to bring back a hereditary monarchy passed from father to son. It goes much deeper than that. It is a desperate plea to finally close the dark chapter that Khomeini opened 47 years ago. They want a factory reset, a return to the modern world, and a reconnection with global civilization. The whispers that the current administration is packing its bags and a new government is inbound are getting louder every single day, taking center stage in the national conversation. And this isn't just idle gossip. The Iranian people have moved past simple slogans and are now taking concrete, dangerous action on the ground to force a change. You need to take a look at these viral visuals. While independent verification is tough in such a closed state, the footage circulating on social media is sending shockwaves through the region. We are seeing clips of two brave young women standing on a balcony, literally setting fire to a massive propaganda banner of Khomeini. That isn't just a piece of paper burning. It symbolizes the empire of fear turning to ash right before our eyes. But let's be clear, the real fuel for this fire isn't just ideology. It is empty stomachs. The country is currently in a free fall, suffering the worst economic collapse in its entire history. We are talking about a reality where basic staples like eggs and tomatoes are now considered luxury items for the rich. Footage coming out of the city of Abdanan captures the exact moment where pure desperation snaps into uncontrollable rage. Crowds are seen storming a supermarket chain owned by the Revolutionary Guards. But catch this detail, they aren't looting the place to steal food for dinner. They are ripping open heavy sacks of rice and throwing the grains into the wind, letting it rain down on the streets in a defiant display. It is a furious protest against a government that thinks a $7 handout is enough to survive on while they hoard stockpiles in their own warehouses and price ordinary people out of existence. By tossing that food into the air, they are sending a chilling message to the ruling class. You starve us, so we reject your entire system. We won't play by your rules anymore. Bozorgmer Shatter, the head of Iran International Digital, breaks it down. He argues that this specific uprising cuts much deeper than anything we have seen before. This isn't just about a bad policy decision or a specific law. It signals an existential crisis for the state itself. The regime's very survival is now on the line. Sharifuddin points out that these protesters aren't just mad about inflation numbers, they are witnessing the total structural collapse of the Iranian economy. He also highlighted a major shift in the global response. Unlike past cycles where the world watched and waited, the international reaction this time has been swift, sharp, and immediate. Throughout all the analysis and statements coming out of the region, one major recurring theme keeps popping up. Sure, the state still has the guns and the batons to crack down on dissent, but there is a growing sense of panic. No one, not even the enforcers, knows what happens tomorrow. The rage on the streets isn't just targeting the bureaucrats pushing the papers. It is striking at the very religious pillars and foundations that hold the power structure together. Nobody buys the empty promises of reform anymore. Even top-tier officials are starting to admit they are facing problems that don't have an easy fix. Now, does this guarantee a full-blown revolution by next Tuesday? No. Does it mean the government falls overnight? Not necessarily. But experts are warning that a government holding on solely through brute force while openly showing its own internal doubts is the definition of instability. We are looking at a system that still has the muscle to crush protests physically, as they have warned repeatedly. However, its psychological armor is cracking. With every new crisis, the regime's confidence in its own longevity takes another massive hit. Amidst all this chaos, there is talk of a massive exodus. We are discussing scenarios involving a tidal wave of migration flooding out of Iran. Reports are focusing on Urmia, a city right on the Turkish border. It is rumored to be a hotbed of unrest and a potential launchpad for thousands looking to flee the country. For the thousands who have hit their breaking point and refuse to let their potential rot in a repressive environment, leaving has become the only option. They view Turkey not just as a neighbor, but as a critical transit hub, a bridge to the west, or a temporary sanctuary from the storm. Let's not forget Iran is a nation with deep roots and an incredible civilizational history. It should be a global powerhouse. But the gross mismanagement by the clerical leadership has suffocated that promise. The people are screaming, "We have the talent, but you are cutting off our oxygen." Just like the Exodus in 1979, today's brightest stars doctors, tech wizards, engineers are packing their bags. Millions simply refuse to waste their lives under incompetent rule. The numbers back this up. A study from Sharif University in Tehran estimates that roughly 2.2 million Iranians fled the country back in 2022 alone. And get this, 62% of those who made it out say they have zero intention of ever going back home. So far, the majority of this brain drain consists of young professionals and university students looking for a future they can't find in Iran. Even state media had to admit that in 2024, around 110,000 students headed overseas, primarily targeting Europe and the United States. And for those who can't get a visa, they are risking everything through illegal migration routes just to get out. We are looking at a staggering wave of migration recorded between January 2023 and March 2024, where data indicates that approximately 20,000 Iranian nationals officially filed for asylum across the European Union. When you look at the United Kingdom, the numbers are even more telling. Over the last decade, roughly 62,000 individuals have sought refuge there. a figure that now surpasses the asylum claims of any other single nationality entering the country. This massive exodus isn't just about seeking better economic opportunities. It appears to be a direct result of a population that has completely lost faith in the possibility of internal political reform. Time and again, the authorities in Tehran have met peaceful demonstrations with brutal force, most notably during the ruthless crackdown on the Women Life Freedom movement, which resulted in the tragic deaths of more than 500 civilians. That nationwide uprising was the breaking point for millions, sparked by the heartbreaking death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini, who lost her life while in the custody of the morality police back in 2022. But beyond the severe state-sponsored repression and crackdowns, the average Iranian is facing an impossible battle just to secure basic employment in a domestic market that is crumbling. The economy has been absolutely shattered by years of relentless Western sanctions, leaving the local currency in freefall and businesses shutting their doors left and right. Even for the fortunate few who still hold onto their jobs, the skyrocketing inflation rates mean their purchasing power is evaporating, causing a steady and painful decline in their overall quality of life. Add to that the suffocating cultural restrictions bans on modern fashion prohibitions on Western music, and you have a recipe for deep-seated frustration that is driving people toward the exits, especially now that fresh protests are igniting across the nation. The demographics of this exodus are particularly alarming for the future of the country, because the data confirms that Iran is currently losing its most educated and talented citizens at an unprecedented rate. We are seeing a distinct pattern where IT professionals and software engineers are relocating to regional hubs like Armenia and the United Arab Emirates, while medical professionals, including doctors and nurses, are heading straight for Europe. Detailed reports coming from legal experts in Armenia and analysis from the Gulf International Forum verify that Yerevan and Dubai have effectively become the new operating bases for exiled Iranian tech talent. It is a bitter irony that the regime's oppressive strategies and economic mismanagement are gifting this highly skilled workforce, educated by Iran's own long-standing state institutions, to Western nations and regional competitors. Analysts warn that if there is no immediate and significant regime change in Tehran, the remaining population holding degrees in science, technology, and engineering will likely follow suit, abandoning the country entirely, echoing the historical precedent set during the revolution of 1979. Back then, millions of Iranians fled to escape the rise of the Khamenei regime, sparking a diaspora that changed the region forever, and we are seeing the early warning signs of a repeat scenario. While it is undeniably true that there was a massive departure during that era, and indeed, a significant brain drain to Europe over the last 4 to 5 years, the narrative on the ground is shifting. However, the reality we are witnessing on the streets of Iran right now in January 2026 tells a completely different story. One not of flight, but of fierce resistance. The people protesting are flipping the script, asking, why should we be the ones to leave? We own this country. It is the oppressors who need to pack their bags. Reports suggest that the people currently standing in long visa lines are not the average citizens. They are the families of the elite, the inner circles of figures like Rouhani and Ghalibaf. It is not the doctors fleeing this time. The ones looking for an exit strategy are the police chiefs and security officials who have tormented the populace as the Iranian people have collectively decided to evict the regime, occupying their land rather than abandon it themselves. The suitcases are indeed being packed in Tehran tonight, but the difference is that this luggage is not being gathered in the poverty-stricken districts. Instead, the packing is happening behind the high walls of the luxury villas and in the bedrooms of the palaces belonging to the ruling class. In a nation where mullahs are openly cursed, where riot police are lowering their shields, where statues of leaders are toppled, and the elite join the visa queue, the regime's survival is no longer a question of political science. It is strictly a matter of time. You have a population that cannot afford simple staples like tomatoes or rice, and who are suffocating under a lack of freedom, yet they remain steadfast. They are absolutely determined to dismantle this system root and branch, even as the very architects and owners of that system attempt to flee to safety. This brings us to the most volatile and critical variable in this entire unfolding equation, a factor that could determine the fate of the entire region. As the palace officials negotiate for diplomatic immunity or exile in friendly nations, the heavily armed security apparatus left behind on the ground, specifically the Revolutionary Guards and the regular army units, may suddenly find themselves staring into a dangerous leadership void. History has taught us exactly what happens in this scenario when a dictatorship's political head begins planning an escape. The military arm typically reacts with one of two distinct reflexes. They will either attempt to stage a coup d'etat to secure their own survival and establish a military junta, or the entire institution will simply dissolve and evaporate into chaos. The atmosphere inside Tehran currently suggests that the Pasdaran is far from a united front. The cracks in the foundation are becoming visible to everyone. There is a widening chasm between the high-ranking generals who have grown fat on the spoils of the regime's corruption for decades, and the lower-ranking officers and foot soldiers who are missing paychecks and whose own families are standing in breadlines, pushing their loyalty to the breaking point. Once the rumors permeate the barracks that the supreme leadership is fantasizing about retirement in Moscow or Europe, the chain of command will snap. There is no soldier on earth willing to fire on his own people to protect a regime that is already halfway out the door, leaving the troops behind to face the consequences. Military hierarchy relies entirely on trust, not just ideology. And right now, that trust is departing the airspace aboard the Russian cargo planes spotted flying out of Tehran. Consequently, the impending collapse in Iran might represent something far more complex than just a regime change. We could be looking at a total redefinition of the state's security architecture. Intelligence predictions are increasingly suggesting that the regular army, which has always maintained deeper, more organic ties to the citizenry than the ideological militias, will likely act on a reflex to preserve Iran's territorial integrity and national borders, rather than fighting to save a dying theocracy in the event of anarchy. So instead of standing by and watching the mullahs flee, the army may seize the moment. They have the potential to forge a new social contract, directly with the people, effectively cutting the clerical establishment out of the equation. The true nightmare scenario for the Tehran regime is not the chanting protesters in the city squares. It is their own betrayed military refusing orders and turning their weapons toward the palace. The question now turns to, how do you see this situation playing out in the coming weeks? Will the mullahs successfully make it onto that plane to Moscow? Or will they face judgment on the streets of Tehran? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. You do not want to go anywhere, folks, because coming up next, we are blowing the lid off the entire narrative to bring you the raw, unvarnished reality behind the Mr. Warlog situation that the establishment has been trying to keep in the dark.